It's 6 o'clock, so if we can make a start. The usual warning prior to the meeting is that this meeting will be live streamed, and if anybody doesn't want to actually be on the streaming, if they could tell the clerk at the end here, that would be useful. Before we start the meeting, I've had a request to move one of the items, and it's the item on Moston Lane East, and I've been asked by Councillor Barnes if that could be moved forward to the beginning of the meeting as he has another engagement. I don't know what the committee feel. Are you okay with that? Okay. Thank you. Sorry? Can't you hear? Well, I'll try to speak up, and if I'll ask other members to speak up if possible. The first item on the agenda is apologies.
Apologies, Chairman, from Councillors Arnott, Hoban and Councillor Sajan. And there's a sub for Councillor Sajan and Jenny Harrison.
Thank you. Urgent business, I've not been notified of any. Sorry? Sorry, Councillor Miller.
Councillor Arnott's not a member of the planning committee, he's a substitute, so his apologies are not relevant.
True.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, yeah. Public questions, I don't think we've received any notification of any public questions. Minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Are we agreed they're the correct record? Right, thanks very much indeed. With your agreement, if we could go on to the, it'll be item 8, which is Moston Lane. Just before we go on to this application, I would just like to say there is some history behind this, as we all are aware, and it did go to appeal. And when it went to appeal, the appeal got dismissed, but it only got dismissed on one particular item, and that was the length of the rear extension, which the officer will outline. But on all the other issues that we refused it on as a committee, they was not only overturned by the inspector, but we've actually the inspector awarded costs to the applicant that the council will have to pay. So I think we have to just be mindful of that before we actually go into the application. And now if we could ask the officer to outline the application. Emma?
The application relates to 298 Moston Lane East, which is a semi-detached two-storey dwelling. The application is for a change of use from a dwelling to a residential care facility. A single-storey rear extension along the boundary of 296 Moston Lane East, a two-storey rear extension and a single-storey rear extension along the boundary with 300 Moston Lane East. The proposal has previously been submitted and refused twice by Planning Committee, and both previous applications were dismissed on appeal. The inspector found in both appeals that the proposed change of use to a residential care facility would not give rise to an unacceptable level of disturbance to neighbouring properties. The proposed rear extension along the boundary with 296 Moston Lane East was considered acceptable by the inspector, as was the first floor rear extension in both instances. In the first application, the proposal was for a single-storey rear extension projecting 6 metres to the rear along the boundary with 300 Moston Lane East, and the second application was for a single-storey rear extension projecting 4 metres along the boundary with Moston Lane East. In both instances, the inspector found the projections of the extension along the boundary of 300 Moston Lane East would cause unacceptable harm to the amenity of this dwelling and would result in poor outlook. The main issue to be considered is the impact of the single-storey rear extension on the residential amenity of the occupiers of 300 Moston Lane East, which is the attached dwelling. The current application proposes a single-storey extension projecting 3 metres along the boundary. Members are advised that in isolation, a single-storey rear extension along the boundary of a neighbouring dwelling would be permitted development and would not normally require planning permission. To clarify, the current application is identical in all other aspects to the previous two applications, which were found by the inspectors to be acceptable in terms of the use. The only issue being the single-storey rear extension adjacent the boundary with 300 Moston Lane East. As the principle of the development of a change of use as a residential care facility, along with the single-storey rear extension along the boundary with 296 Moston Lane East and the two-storey rear extension have already been established as acceptable by the two inspectors, members are requested to recommend approval of the application subject to the conditions set out in the report. And can I just draw members' attention to the late list where we've received an additional representation from Councillor Shuttleworth and a member of the public as well, which you should hopefully have a copy of. For comparison, this is the 4-metre rear extension. This is number 300 Moston Lane East here. This is the 4-metre rear extension that the inspector found unacceptable, and this is the current proposal, projecting 3 metres from the rear wall. And that concludes my presentation, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Has any members got any questions of the officer on the presentation? Councillor Hussain.
Chair, very quickly, it'd be probably, better if you can tell us how the extension is going to be reduced on this picture rather than on the previous one, because I was slightly, on this one here now. So what are we saying exactly?
I think it's been reduced on the latest application by a metre.
By a metre?
By a metre, yes. This the single-storey rear extension that the inspector found unacceptable, which now projects here 3 metres here. They found that the first floor extension, which is further away from the boundary, was acceptable, and also the long extension here along the boundary with 296 Moston Lane East was acceptable. It's just the single-storey extension, it's not very clear on this plan, that just projects here 3 metres from the rear wall, the original rear wall.
Thank you. Has anybody else got any questions?
Yeah.
Yes, Kent.
Yeah, have you got any pictures related to the amenities and other properties around in that area? Or are these the only pictures you have? Okay, all right, that's fine.
Is that one okay for you? Sorry, yeah. So that's the single-storey rear extension along, this is 296 and this is 300 here. And this is what the inspector found acceptable, and the 2-storey rear extension goes here. And that is the extension that we're asking you to consider today, but that actually has been reduced significantly, and there's just the remnants of a wall there at the moment. All of this bit's come down, which you should be able to see there. It's just that those are the most recent aerial photographs.
If there's no further questions, we've just got two speakers, both councillors on this particular item, and if I could ask Councillor Shuttleworth first to address the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. I first spoke against this application some 2 years ago when it was dismissed by the committee, and I'm sorry that we're back in this position again, because it does have a definite impact in terms of the neighbouring properties. One thing I want to bring to your attention at the moment is that a resident spoke to me outside before the meeting commenced, obviously, who informs me that this extension that's 3 metres is measured, it's actually 3.5 metres at the moment. In terms of the recommendations on page 48, item number 3, it does make reference to the brickwork. I understand that whilst the recommendation says that it should be consistent, there are 5 different types of brick in that extension, so that's a problem. And I also understand that the roof that is on it is a pitch roof and not a flat roof, which again doesn't meet the the present requirements. I think also what needs to be done with this application is building control need to look at it, because I am concerned about what's going on when somebody starts to throw 5 bedrooms along a garden and refuses access by building control. I do worry about what we're actually looking at. And clearly, taking into account that this has been dismissed by the planning committee, and the planning inspectorate was also concerned about it, we need to make sure that any extension is right. So that's for starters. Also, at the last time I spoke about it, I made reference to adult social services and their concerns about it. So when this came up again, I made that same approach, and I'm quite happy to tell you exactly what adult social services said, and it's done with their permission. Because whilst officers may say, well, this doesn't relate to the planning application, it does actually specify that it will be used for an institution. So I do believe it's relevant. And it also goes to show the uncertainty as to what could be there. And the email from social services said, when asked what the plan for the building was, this is to the applicant, the company at first said it would be transitional respite with 8 bedrooms, staff room, and will provide respite cover for hospices, including end-of-life care, which is different to what is on the statement. It looks like this will be for Manchester and Stockport and Oldham. It was carefully explained that this is not how Oldham would expect a service to be developed, especially when out-of-borough clients will be supported here. Oldham commissioners have a partnership approach to service development, which was missing in this instance, and without a clear plan for the development, it puts the council at risk of having no oversight of services within our footprint. This includes statutory responsibilities and potentially pressures on other services such as health. With the above in mind, Westwood have been advised to engage with the Gateway panel process as a matter of good practice. This is led by Strategic Housing and includes colleagues from Commissioning, Revenues and Benefits and other teams depending on submissions. It goes on to say the process gives us an opportunity to gain assurance that there is a need for this scheme stroke service, that rents are fair and appropriate to the use of the building and allows for scrutiny of who the applicants are in terms of their business. It went on to say Westwood Home Care have also been invited to meet with commissioners in Oldham to discuss the projects with the aim of finding out more about their business and supporting them to understand how we prefer to lead in our commission requirements. When you look elsewhere at the options that are there, and we look at the planning statement that goes with the papers, and I know it's not in your papers, but it was submitted by the applicant, and it says the road is a busy trafficked road which acts as a cut through from Broadway to Allenwood Avenue. So there's an admission there from the applicant that this stretch of Moston Lane is busy, despite the fact that it might be indicated otherwise in the papers. It also says the property was previously under the ownership of the Methodist Church for several years, who had other outbuildings at the rear where the nuns used to reside as well as holding Sunday schools. Well, I spoke to residents about this 2 years ago, and I was told then at the time at no stage was there any other buildings on the land, nor was there a Sunday school there, although it was used by the minister from Chainbar Methodist Church, which is about a mile or so away from the property. In terms of staff numbers, the applicant has mentioned in the submission that the proposal will create 4 full-time jobs and 2 part-time jobs. Depending upon what paper you're reading within this application, you will find that this varies. The officers have been told something different as to what is there. If I can find it, I think we're told 6 to 8 full-time jobs, which isn't the situation. If members would care to look at their planning papers, on page 58, there's also another institution that's a new one. And I've taken the time to look at that statement today. And this is an institution just for 3 people. That particular one is taking 8 full-time staff. Here we've got 8 residents and possibly 2 staff on to deal with 8 people who, according to this, could be very vulnerable individuals indeed. So what is the ratio that should be applied before we indicate anything that would be suitable at this particular property? There are a number of questions also that I believe require answering, not within the papers. Are there going to be drugs and medication on the premises? If so, where will these be housed and kept securely? For information purposes, I can recall that this house was subject to a firearms attack some years ago, which was believed to be drug related. So I don't believe we can ignore that. I presume there will be some clinical waste. How will that be dealt with, as opposed to just the industrial bins that are there? The planning statement says at the front of the property there is an existing driveway which can accommodate 3 vehicles. I'm not sure what size vehicles we'll be talking about, but I would be very, very surprised if that frontage can actually house 3 medium-sized vehicles, and then those vehicles would have to be removed as and when the waste bins are removed. Presumably, the residents will require medical support. What arrangements are in place for parking? Will this be on the highway, which is stated in the applicant's planning statement as the road is a busy traffic road, as I said earlier? As for staffing levels, there are contradictions here. Again, the planning statement states, in terms of staff numbers, the proposal will create 4 full-time jobs and 2 part-time jobs. If you look at page 40 of your papers, and the last paragraph under the heading proposal, it states 6 to 8 full-time staff with 2 at the property at all times. So which is it? Could 2 staff on during the day cook, clean and anything else that may come their way whilst attempting to deal with the needs of the residents? Which is it, and what would be an appropriate ratio of staff to residents with the needs as described in the papers? I believe that there are many unanswered questions as to the use of the property, and I'm greatly concerned as to what the use of this would actually be, as the applicant doesn't know or would not appear to know exactly what they want at this address. I'll maintain my view that this application should be refused. While I appreciate what the planning inspector has said, I think he's dismissed a lot of information on the previous one. As I said before, I would urge you to at least, very least, defer this application at this stage. Now, the Adult Social Services came back today to update me on their comments, and so there's nothing hidden from my side. I can tell you what they said. We established that there are connections with Stockport and Manchester councils, so we're making inquiries with commissioners there. It was clear that they have no clear plan for their use of the building and want to be led by us as to what it could be used for. It was explained to them that this isn't how we usually commission services, and we are in a position to approach the market for our areas of need. We would do so through a formal tender process, which will be accompanied by a service specification, etc. They were advised that we do have a need for both respite and supported living provision, which of course is different to what they're talking about, but that we need to plan appropriately and be led by what we need to have in place based on our data and wider intelligence. And when we are ready to engage and consult with the market, we will include them at the point of wider discussion. I just wish to make one final comment that has come to me from a resident on behalf of residents, and that is the residents of Moston Lane East and the surrounding areas' feelings in relation to this and the last planning application have not changed and they remain the feeling of the community that this property isn't suitable for the proposed application. We would also like to point out that during these periods, the owner of 298 Moston Lane East has continued to carry on the build, showing how much regards they have for the planning process and the local community. As I said at the outset, Chair, I think there is a number of issues that I've just raised that need further consideration, and I would again ask the Planning Committee to defer the decision this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Has anybody got any questions of Councillor Shuttle? Yes, Councillor.
The council planning committee is saying 3 metres, and Councillor Graham Shuttle was saying 3.5. How did you get the 3.5, and how the 3.5 metres you're saying is not 3 metres?
I've been told that it's been measured and it's 3.5 metres.
Possibly we could ask the officer to tidy things up in questions after the other speaker has spoken. Has anybody else got any questions of Councillor? Yes, Councillor Bethian.
On page 42, the representations, it says there could be an issue with flooding. How would flooding be caused by this extension? Have you any idea, or do we need to ask the officers this? I don't know.
I can't really comment on that, Chair. You know, I don't know what information might be available to the resident to suggest that. I do know from previous talks that their concern is that you've got a 3-bedroom property that suddenly has another 5 bedrooms thrown in, all with ensuite facilities. So therefore, he's going to have greater drainage systems problems, or potentially.
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Bethian. Councillor Barnes. Sorry, Councillor Gloucester.
Thanks, Graham. Can I just ask, so if it was deferred, what would be the point in that? Is just to let enforcement go and have a look, or what is your thoughts behind a deferral? Can I just ask that? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Councillor Gloucester. A couple of reasons. One is building control should be looking at this. I got a report in the early days of this application and say I've been dealing with it personally for 2 years, or more than 2 years. Building control went down. I'm sorry to say they had to leave the site. And you can guess why they had to leave the site. They were denied access and they felt uncomfortable. An enforcement officer went down and had to go down with first response because of the way building control was treated. So that is a concern there. And that is why it needs looking at. And as I said, the extension at the moment is about 3.5 metres. It's 5 different types of brickwork, which are all against what is there in the papers at the present time. And that is why I'm asking for deferral, because it needs to be looked at.
Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and I'd like to thank you for agreeing to bring this forward. Mr Chairman, fellow councillors, I am speaking tonight on behalf of residents to support their opposition to this planning application. My colleague, Councillor Shuttleworth, has spoken previously against the previous application, and I fully endorse what he said in September 21, and I fully agree with what he said tonight. Similar planning applications have previously been rejected, and I call upon the committee to reject this application as well. If approved, this application will have a detrimental effect on the community. Furthermore, as Councillor Shuttleworth has already said, the applicant has previously begun work on the building without planning permission on multiple occasions. Where is his respect for rules and regulations? I went down there last night, and I've seen it. It's a building site. It's not protected. Anyone can walk in. What enforcement action has been taken? There's no regard for building control, and I don't think this person, quite frankly, is taking authority seriously. It's not screened off, and before anything else is dealt with, I would be asking the council to take enforcement action against him more robustly. There have been over 20 objections to the application. Now, I have spoken previously with residents about this matter, and I fully understand the strength of opposition to this application. Pardon me. I have grave concerns about what the planning inspector said. I don't agree with him when he says that there's not an issue with traffic or parking. In my opinion, nothing could be further from the truth. Parking is already at a premium along Moston Lane East. On the Oldham side, there is provision for off-road parking. However, on the Manchester side, there is no provision for off-road parking. There is also the concern about delivery vehicles visiting the site. There is space for at best 3 or 4 vehicles. So where will the delivery vehicles park, and how regular will the deliveries be? In addition, there are other commercial businesses in the immediate vicinity. For example, Sparkle's Cake Shop and Ryder and Dutton Estate Agents. But both these businesses have provision for off-road parking. Other businesses, such as Takeaway on Broadway, for example, operate in the evening. So I don't believe it's reasonable to compare different commercial businesses and conclude that there will be very little impact on the community. Parking is a major concern for residents, and it's not a credible argument to argue that this will have little impact simply because the residents who live in 298 Broadway do not have vehicles. Are we to believe that any visitors who may come will all use public transport? And where will the staff park? As Councillor Shuttleworth said, how many staff will there be? Moston Lane East is busy enough already without adding further to congestion. It's a bus route. Additional vehicles will add to air pollution. And then we've got the potential issue of antisocial behaviour. Now, whilst there may not be any at the moment, how can we say there won't be any in the future? And why is the planning officer assuming there will not be an issue from noise from the property? If approved, this facility will be built smack bang in the middle of a residential community. I understand the need for sustainable communities, but Moston Lane East is not the right area for such a development. A council policy on paper does not necessarily work in practice. It is not in keeping with the area, and it will have a direct impact not just on Moston Lane East, but also on neighbouring streets. It is a residential area that runs along a very busy, narrow road. The impact on residents in terms of stress has been immense. They have a right to quiet enjoyment. If approved, this development will impact negatively on the community. The planning application is different. It's not just a case of a 1 metre reduction. The applicant now has built a 2-storey extension to the rear of the main property on the other side close to 296. Why would he do this without planning permission, knowing all the issues that are currently going on with this? It appears that the recommendation to approve is rewarding someone who has flagrantly broken the law on numerous occasions by building without planning consent and his staff behaving in a threatening manner to council officers. Why has he shown disregard to the council and especially the residents? And who will be the customers of this business? Where's the service provision for it? Where does he hope to find customers? It's all right. I just don't see where the business is coming from. And what plans has he to manage the levels of noise from the building? Are we seriously expected to believe that there will be no noise or the possibility of noise pollution? And has the planning inspector visited the area to assess the building or met with residents to discuss their concerns? I believe, having spoken to a resident last night, that before any final decision is taken, that this opportunity is afforded to residents and the planning inspector meets with them to discuss their concerns rather than the planning committee approve it. I do not believe that this application has met the requirements for approval by the committee, and it's a clear example of significant overdevelopment. I urge members to reject this application and put the people who live in the community first. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Has anybody got any questions at all, Councillor Barnes? I'll ask the officer if she wants to respond to any of the issues that have been raised.
In relation to the rear extension that is apparently been built to 3.5 metres. What we're asking committee to actually determine is a proposal for 3 metres. When I went out on site on the 20th of December, there was no rear extension. There was this wall, but there was no rear extension. Those are photos that I've taken from the site. But what we are asking members to consider is a 3 metre extension along this boundary. And if it is true that it has been built up to 3.5 metres, that is something that we would send to our enforcement team.
Thank you. Could I ask Mr. Richards to make comments on it?
Yeah, and thank you to the ward councillors for bringing their concerns tonight. Obviously, there's a lot of matters that have been raised. Ultimately, as Emma's just said, in terms of the extension, whatever's physically there at the moment, what we are concerned about is what is in the plans. And then ultimately what is, if it is granted permission, what is built. Obviously, if there's concerns about the size of what is built, whether it's in accordance with the plans, we'd investigate at that point in time. But at the moment, when it's a retrospective application like this, we can't consider what's on the ground now. We consider what it has permission for already, comparing it to what it's being asked for in terms of permission. And that's our focus. And so, in terms of a lot of the concerns that have been raised, while they're perfectly valid concerns, and do not want to dismiss them at all, from a planning point of view, they're not necessarily what we can consider. So elements around what type of care, what geography is being served by that care, whether there's a need even for this accommodation, we can't consider that. All we consider is what's physically being proposed on the ground, and whether the use in general, because a C2 use can be very broad with very different types of care involved, different numbers of staff, as your comments have alluded to, in different circumstances. And so we have to take it in a very general level at that C2 use about what is appropriate. And ultimately, on that particular issue around use, we've now had 2 appeals where the inspectors have come back saying they are happy with the proposed use. The issue was the size of the extension. And that is something we have to give significant weight to in our decision making now. It's been to 2 inspectors and they've both considered it in that way. Likewise, matters of the conduct of the applicant, whether they've built without permission, whether they've even threatened council staff, as you've suggested. We, again, in the planning process, we can't consider that. We're not assessing the applicant, we're assessing the application before us. And that's a crucial element of the planning system at this point in time. In terms of a suggestion that this application be deferred tonight, the basis that Councillor Shuttleworth was suggesting was to allow building control access to the site and to investigate. Again, building control is a separate process from planning. So we can't hold up a decision on a planning application because we have concerns about the building control process. That's a separate process that they have their own legislation and powers to go and investigate as they need to. So yeah, that can't be something that we use to hold up an application tonight as a deferral. Just looking through my notes. I think in terms of concerns around Councillor Barnes raised around the inspector, well, first of all, the inspector would have visited the area, yes, that's a key part of any planning appeal. They would visit the site. They wouldn't necessarily meet with the community, no, that's not normal practice for a planning inspector. They've got to be independent in that regard. And they can't now review their decision as you're suggesting. This is a new application that's been put to us as a council, as a local planning authority. We have to make a new decision based upon what's before us tonight. Yeah, I think I've covered most of the things.
Thank you. Is any member want to ask any questions of the officers? Latest comments? If not, the application is open for debate and discussion. Has anybody got any comments on this? Councillor Hussain.
Yeah, everyone
Read it.
seems to be quiet on this one, but I just want to clarify a few things, if I may, Chair. The 3.5 metre is already been raised, and I think it's been answered. The second one was the actual material. So if the committee was mindful of approving this application tonight, I know it'll be down to the enforcement that will take the necessary action if necessary, but will that be reduced back to 3 metres, or I'm unclear on that. What will happen?
So we are asking members to approve a 3 metre extension. If it's found that it has been built larger than 3 metres, then we would be looking to take enforcement action to get it to comply with the plans as submitted.
I think members as well must be aware that with a 3 metre extension, that could be classed as permitted development as well, you know, for a household.
And
Sorry,
if I can just carry on. In terms of the material, I noticed condition 3 of the recommendation is also implying that the material must be used in compliance with the rest of the materials in the area. If and it's been raised by one of the ward councillors that that's not the case, is that true, or what will be done about that?
Well, as you can see from the photographs that I've taken, these are the materials that have been used on the new extension, the 2-storey extension, and you can just about see from my photos that those are also a red brick. That one is slightly paler than this one, but that might be due to the age of the bricks, because these are a newer brick. This was a previous extension that was already there, that is not subject to this current application. So that was a previous extension that's been there for a long time. So that is why that's a different material, because that one is not part of the application and it isn't something that we can take any enforcement against, because that's been there for more than 4 years. So we couldn't do anything about the materials on this bit here.
So if I can come back in, Chair, I can see there are 3 different shades there. Can we add a condition on this application that the final finish would be in line with the local properties? Can we add something like that onto the conditions, or can we not?
Yeah.
I think, if I may, Councillor, saying that effectively what condition 3 is saying is requiring that. It's saying it's got to be consistent colours and materials between the different types of parts of the extension, but it would only apply to what is new development under this application. So that's why we're drawing the comparison there between that bit of the extension you can see there that has previously been there, that we have no control over anymore, compared to the 2-storey extension, which is new and is part of this application, where we can, through that condition, ensure that it is built in a way that the materials are consistent.
Has anybody else got any? Yes, Councillor Lancaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, but I think this probably will be a question for the officers. I know we've moved on from that, but I've just thought of something. Both Councillor Shuttleworth and Councillor Barnes spoke about the on-street parking situation and the provision on that front. I do accept the comment in the report which says that they don't expect the car ownership of the residents to be high, but I was just wondering if the highways officer could comment on that issue of visitation, because I think I do accept the point that's been made that visitation, be it from friends, family and medical support, is likely to be considerable. So I wonder what effect that would have on the on-street parking situation. Thank you.
So there are a few things here. So there are 2 good parking spaces there, which is what you would expect from that type of dwelling in that type of neighbourhood. We're in an area where there are good links to public transport, because we've already mentioned that it's actually on a bus route. So we're encouraging people. We've got the balance, just hear me out, where we're not encouraging people to drive, but there are measures in place if they do have to drive and park. So as with every other dwelling and property in that area and business, anybody who does drive, they have the opportunity, they'll have to park somewhere safe and legal nearby, not necessarily outside the property. So that's one thing that all drivers have to do. They've also got the opportunity of walking or getting on the bus. I'm not saying that, so if we provided a car park, that would attract more people to the property. So it's sort of a balance, and one of the conditions that we've attached is for cycle storage. So any staff member that doesn't want to park outside or hasn't got a car or a visitor, they can use the cycle storage. So it's not perfect. We haven't got 8 members of staff all with their own parking space, but do we want that? Similarly with, sorry, I know you refer to visitors, similarly with visitors, we're not providing or asking for visitor parking.
If I can, Mr. Chairman. I heard what's just been said, but unfortunately, as a broader point, I'm never convinced by the availability of public transport and relying on people walking from further afield. It always strikes me as causing adverse effects on the on-street situation, but I appreciate the answer that you've given. Thank you.
Councillor Naseem.
Yeah, thank you. Just for regarding highways, with the type of dwelling it will be, have you considered any disability parking or disabled parking, or will that not be an issue at all? Yeah.
So if there's a particular need for a disabled person to park, the driveway is available for that. So you'd expect that the operator would make provision for that. So it's not dedicated disabled person parking, because that would then reduce the parking for other people that need to park there. So again, it's this balance between the expectation of how people are travelling there. And again, the residents are very unlikely to own cars. So if it would be visitors and staff that would need that disabled parking.
Has anybody else got any further comments? Councillor Gloucester.
I can see what I'm looking at on the screen in front of me. So that's an extension that's already been built, isn't it? But it's part of this application for permission. I just want to clarify this, because I think this is really confusion. It's been a few times before, and I do remember it. So is that the case?
Yeah, the 2-storey extension. Yeah, that is currently an unauthorised extension. But it is part of this current application for assessment.
Yeah, I get that. So, what is, if we didn't approve this tonight, and I understand what the inspector has said, but this is just a scenario, would enforcement have that removed?
So they have the opportunity to appeal. If committee were minded to refuse the application tonight, they would have the opportunity to appeal again. And the previous 2 inspectors found that the 2-storey extension was acceptable. Yeah.
So the 3 metre or 3.5, whichever we're looking at, we're not really sure, are we? They could do that under permitted development, couldn't they? They could go away tonight, forget about this, or amend this, they come back with another application to remove that, but then put that on at a later date, could they? Or, because they've already had a large extension, have we still got that 30% rule in place? Can you just clarify that for me as well?
Yeah, so ordinarily a 3-metre single-storey rear extension wouldn't require planning permission. But because it would be attached to the 2-storey extension, which is also attached to the extension that goes along the boundary with 296, it would need planning permission. But if they were to currently, because it is currently a dwelling, if they were currently to separate it even by a centimetre, the 3-metre rear extension wouldn't need planning permission.
Sorry. Yeah.
I think just to clarify as well, in terms of the issue of enforcement that's been raised, and you know what could we do in certain scenarios. The bottom line is, at the moment, while there is an application in, while there are then maybe an appeal, or in the past where we've had applications refused, gone to appeal, we can't take enforcement action. And so ultimately, until this process is fully resolved, we can't do anything from an enforcement point of view. The whole point of having a permission that we are happy with, if the committees are happy with it, then that gives us then the control. Because if they don't build in accordance with the permission, then we can investigate. And I think that's just, I just want to clarify that and get that point across, is that, you know, you see a picture like that on the screen. no, you know, I'm not going to take anything away from that. That's not what you want to see in the rear of a property like this. But the longer this goes on, the harder it is for us to do anything about it. And it's about trying to get to the point where we have a permission that we all are happy with, or as happy as we can be, and then we can ensure that what is built to that permission.
Councillor Woodburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is quite ridiculous. That's obviously a mess. It's obviously too much for the space that it's in. And I think we have to take a stand against inappropriate development. If we approve this, we're saying that basically anybody across the borough can build what they want and we'll just approve it later at a later date. It's wrong. What we should be doing is standing up and saying, no, you've built that without permission, rip it down and put the house back to how it was, because it's not appropriate. And I don't think we should be approving it. It's quite ridiculous.
I think the problem that we have tonight, quite seriously, is that this committee has refused this application twice, and they've refused it against officers' advice twice, because the officers recommended approval on both occasions. It's gone to appeal, and as options at appeal have been reduced by the inspector's comments, which you've read in the report. So basically, the inspector did dismiss the last appeal, but only on one particular element, and that was the size of the extension that we're talking about. That extension has been reduced to 3 metres. Now, this council is paying costs and has to pay costs to this applicant because we actually refused it on a number of grounds last time, and we're having to pay costs to the applicant for all those particular items that we refused it on last time. And I'll be quite frank, I think that if we refuse it tonight, it'll go to appeal and this council will finish up paying substantial costs. And that's unfortunately true. And it will then get approved anyway without us having proper control over it. Sorry, Councillor Woodburn.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think the inspector's wrong and we should refuse the application.
Sorry?
If I may just address one point to what Councillor Woodvine has said in terms of, well, again, totally understand the concern about what's on the screen and the fact that the applicant has undertook work without permission, and it frustrates me, as I've said before, at this committee, when that happens across at different locations across the borough. That is not a reason for refusal. We cannot, in fact, that was put as a reason for refusal tonight and goes ultimately before an inspector. It will be one of those situations where the inspector says that is unreasonable and award costs against us, in my opinion, because that is not the basis upon which we assess. As much as I would like it to be, and as much as I would like us to be able to take punitive action where people do things without the appropriate permission, we are limited by the legislation and what we can do. And so I come back to the point where the control, as Councillor Dean just mentioned, the control we have is when we grant a permission and we can ensure someone is actually building to it.
Is there any further comments? Councillor Hussain.
Yeah, I think she raised, the councillor colleague raised
Councillor
her hand.
Gloucester.
Yeah. Councillor Gloucester first.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor.
Can I just ask how much we've had to pay in costs, or is that not disclosable? I'm just interested to know. We've already had to pay a chunk out of council taxpayers' money because it wasn't upheld at appeal. So if we do make the suggestion from our colleagues, how much are we likely to pay out again when it doesn't go through again at appeal?
I don't know whether you want to comment on that.
come in first? Should I come in first?
Well, I don't know.
Well, I mean, first of all, before I answer the question, the amount is not necessarily relevant. It's about a principle of what is reasonable, and what have you. In terms of what the actual amount is, I don't have that to hand. Do you know it, Martin, off hand?
If memory serves me correctly, it was £900.
But having said that, this authority in other situations has lost, well, I think the highest we've been awarded against us is £80,000. I'm not saying that this application has that magnitude of cost associated with it, but I think it's one of those things that members just have to make a judgment on. And I think one of the main things is that if this goes to appeal again, we can lose control of actually what actually goes there, because the inspector will make the decision for us.
Chair, can I just...
Yes, I can.
Can I just make a comment, Chair, about, as you know, I warn members about where they're making decisions against officer recommendations. Costs get awarded where against the council where it's deemed to have acted in an unreasonable manner. And one of the examples that's given by the planning inspectorate for unreasonable behaviour is where they put, and I'm quoting this, persisting in objections to a scheme or part of a scheme which has already been granted planning permission, or which the Secretary of State or an inspector has previously indicated to be acceptable. So, as you've heard the history here, the inspector is quite happy with most of the proposal. It was the issue about the extent of the length of the extension that was the concern. So that's the issue that you need to be focusing on, because anything else that you're bringing forward is unlikely to be considered to be reasonable behaviour, because the planning inspector has considered these issues at the previous appeals and found them to be acceptable.
Right, where are we going with this anyway? I would reluctantly move that we recommend approval to the application, so we can actually find out where the committee's feelings are. Is that seconded at all? Right.
With a comment, if I may,
Yes, sir.
please, Chair. I know most of us sat here as a committee, it's a difficult decision for us, but the reality is it was just been outlined by the legal department and yourself. I think the sensible move would be that we move it. Otherwise, 6 months down the line, the inspector will approve it and we'll get it on our island. We want to be in control of the whole development. So with that in mind, I'll second the application.
Right, it's open for comment. It's been moved and seconded approval, so it's open for anybody to comment on that before we go to a vote. Right, if we move to the vote then, all those in favour of approval, please show.
8, Chairman.
So there's 8 for. Those against approval? There's 2.
2, Chairman.
Abstaining?
3, Chairman.
Sorry, 3 abstentions. Thank you. The application is therefore approved. If we can then now move on to the what was the first application, which is at item number 6 on your agenda, and that is the Knowles Lane development. If we can just hang on about a couple of minutes till people get settled again. Right, okay, we move on now to the Knowles Lane development and it's a revised matter application in regard to 254 dwellings, and I will ask Mr Dickman to outline the revised application.
Right, thank you, Chair. As you've suggested, obviously this is an application that, for a site that committee have had a number of previous applications come forward, including one for the approval of reserved matters for the residential development scheme on the site. This is an application for a variation primarily to the house types on the site. So the overall numbers of houses are basically, well, exactly the same as on the previous application, and the layout, the general layout of the sites, the road layout and so forth, again is very similar. So it's mainly a change in the house types themselves. So again, you'll know this is the site, obviously the site within the red edge. The central blue area is basically where the link road application goes, and the other blue edge is just other land outside the application site that the applicant owns. Again, the aerial view of the site, so effectively it's this area enclosed and around that part of the site, and you'll see some more close-ups later on. Again, a couple of general views. Gives you an idea of the site at the moment. So this is the layout, and as I say, it's pretty much the same general configuration, so where the road layouts are placed. There's a tributary to the brook that runs through the centre of the site, so obviously that is a feature and that remains on site. I'll come back later, there's some properties which front onto Knowles Lane, there's a slight alteration to those, we'll go into detail, but again, as you can see, the general configuration. To the north here is the wooded area alongside the main brook, and you can see existing residential developments in other boundaries of the site. This is a phasing plan. The first phase is this central section to come forward, second phase in the blue areas, then we've got other phases coming later into the site, third phases, fourth phases and so forth. So it's basically starting from the proposed new Knowles Lane junction into the site. As you know, there's affordable housing being provided, and that's a pro rata from the original hybrid outline approval of the sites. There are 53 properties as part of the 234 in total that be provided. These are the areas where those properties are proposed. As you can see, the first section, there is an element of housing to be provided there. And again, similarly in an early phase of the development. And you'll see in the report, I give a little bit more detail as to when the various amounts of housing will come forward. These are just, again, indicative house types we run through. I'll just pause on this one at the moment because you'll see in the late list there's a representation there received from Saddleworth Parish Council, and one of those representations is about the 2.5-storey properties that are being imposed and whether they are appropriate in the area. So this is an example of two house types of that, and as you can see, they're of the style with the taller roof space, these kind of small dormer windows and roof lights in there. So in effect, they're not significantly larger, they're not full 3-storey properties, they're quite common in the design of modern developments. And as you can see, even in relationship to other buildings, they provide a little bit of visual interest within the site, and therefore we don't consider they are inappropriate. A couple of other examples there, and what this is showing to some extent is that you have some artificial stone properties on the site. These are positioned in various locations. It includes alongside Knowles Lane and in the areas in the southeast corner of the site where there is proximity to the listed buildings, and again more traditional brick elements to them there. One thing I would comment on, and again it's in the report on the designs, on the energy section there's been an indication that the applicant is looking at photovoltaic panels on the roofs of these properties. Which properties those are, how that will be planned, it obviously has some impact on the orientation of those properties, because obviously roof spaces facing south, more efficient for that. But within that context, they will be used. So obviously, whilst you can see these mix of roof tiles, either the grey or the red, obviously there will be a potential third, and that's what you will see. And where those are put in place, they will be built into the roof, so not like a retrofit of those properties, so they'll be fitted in there. So there'll be a third element of that in the scheme. Again, just a couple of finer ones. The other one is obviously just, it's linked in with other properties. This is the materials layout, so again it's just showing you a little bit what I've just said is around the Knowles Lane areas of the site where there are more traditional properties. They've gone for that stone finish, and with the more brick properties further within the site. Again, it's just giving an element of a view. This is showing between the site and where St Agnes School is, and that's just to show you again the relationship. There's some listed buildings in this area, and as you can see there's an intervening space which will be landscaped. You can see some of the elements of landscaping on that, so there'll be no direct impact on those listed buildings. And then onto the site frontage, so ultimately one of the access roads will come onto Knowles Lane. I've got a picture of that. You can see these properties on the opposite side of Knowles Lane, and this is the frontage to the site. So this is the new link which is being put in at the moment. As you can see, there are 7 properties, and these are served off a small cul-de-sac, so there's not direct access onto the street. There were 8 originally on this. One of those has now been moved further into the site. The numbers have stayed the same, but there'll be less on this direct frontage. The other element to note about this is that a new footway will be provided across the site. There's no footway at the moment, and the existing stone wall will need to be reinstated. So again, this is the area. You can see the stone wall at the moment. You can see there's no footway. Obviously, the school is down here. You've got residential properties, and obviously people with children going that way at the moment would have to cross the road. What it effectively will provide is a footway all the way through on that side of the road. And this is just to show you that this was approved under a separate application, separate part of the application for the link road. And this is just to show that that work has commenced on there. Finally, just some on these, just some indication. This is the area on the western side of the site. So there's a small area of properties which will be on the opposite side of the link road. This is more wooded area in this part of the site as well. And perhaps it's worth commenting as well, going back to the Saddleworth Parish Council comment, some elements about fences and so forth, and the views you get into the site. Essentially, in these areas of the site, you will have screen fences. Houses will back onto these areas, but as you can see, general public views there are limited. And I think we're finished with a layout, and I can show you again the areas of the site with the open views. You'll see they're all designed so that properties face onto there, so you get the front gardens in that area. Again, just showing you those parts of the site. On to the footpaths, and again, this hasn't changed from the previous application. So there are 2 existing field footpaths that cut across the site. This is the easterly one. You can see the way that works. That will be diverted around the development. As originally proposed on the last application, it was going to come up this link road, and following representations it was changed. So we get a new, wider, properly surfaced track there, which will actually allow a greater element of use, particularly in inclement weather, through the site. This is just some photographs showing you at the moment the route of that. We go into the centre of the site, and I say there's a tributary of the brook that runs through there, which is obviously will be retained as a feature of the site. This is looking across the site. You can see the field footpath running through, and there's views towards existing properties. So this is the second footpath diversion that runs through the site. So this will run as a separate footpath on the edge of the tributary. The representation from the ramblers as to whether it could be moved further away. There'll be a physical separation from the driveway. Unfortunately, because of the topography at that point, it can't be moved away. So that will then link either, you have two options, you either walk a short way along the estate road and then you come down the existing route which will be retained, but there will also be a new dedicated footpath link that will link through to Knowles Lane as well, which again links through to the footpath as I indicated earlier to the school. This is just showing the centre of the site. These are a few showing that right of way, so the one that we showed initially, we show you the views that come through on that and the elements of landscaping that will be proposed. These are again elements of where the footpaths exist, the entrance points. This is the existing one you can come out on, and there'll be a new one which comes out this point onto a widened section of the footway. As required as part of the outline approval, there is a local area of play within the site. This is identical to the previously approved scheme. And one of the issues that's obviously been raised and was obviously subject to considerable discussion at the last meeting was the mine shaft in the corner of the site and obviously its implications for these houses. We had a lot of discussion last time about the Coal Authority and their views. As a result, to be certain, we consulted them directly on this application. They have come back through a chain of emails which has ultimately led to a final email indicating that they are satisfied that there is a methodology which can be put in place that this development can be created in a safe manner. But again, as we said at the previous meeting, that is primarily a matter for the conditions of the outline approval and will need to be satisfied separate of any decision that's made tonight. Just your layout again, I mean, obviously it's a very small scale, so you can't see that very well, but all these properties around these areas, so these open areas of the site and facing towards a brook there, all face on to the open space, which is obviously a benefit both for the residents themselves and obviously in terms of the views of the site itself. So as I say, this application, what we're all dealing with is simply the reserved matters, and they're stated on in the application form, the principle of the development, principle of the access to the site, general traffic generation issues, other issues such as ecology and so forth, all are matters for the outline approval and will be dealt with as part of the as part of the condition discharge process separate tonight. The decision tonight has to relate solely to those reserved matters as are being put forward. And in the report, obviously, there's more detail on each of those issues, and obviously members, I'm sure, will have some questions on those which are going to move forward. Otherwise, obviously, Chair, it's recommended for approval, subject to the conditions in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Dickman. Has anybody got any questions on the presentation? Yes, sir.
Councillor Marland, I've forgotten my my name tag. Yes, I just wanted to ask about the housing types. In the 2019 committee report, significant weight was given to the fact that no permission had been given to the development of any of this size within the last 10 years. And it confirmed that the housing demand in this area was greatest with single people and couples. These residents obviously need these types of houses for 1 and 2 bedroom properties. But this development, it clearly shows that it's 3, 4 and 5 bed houses. So it's not addressing that need in any way. What can be done to make it that this development does actually deliver on meeting those needs? As singles and couples are highly unlikely to want 3, 4 and 5 bed houses. They won't have the need for it and they certainly won't be able to afford them.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, again, this is an issue that was discussed previously and obviously is mentioned in the report. There was no condition imposed at the outline stage which dictated a mix of properties. I appreciate exactly what you say about the wider conversation, the wider justification for development on the site. But what we're down to is the reserved matters. What these reserved matters are, what the issues are that you can take into consideration is set out. It's in National Planning Guidance. It explains to you that it's relationships, the layout's about relationships and so forth between properties and other features on the site. What it doesn't allow you to do is to dictate the mix. We can't go back in time, but if that was something which was to be imposed, it has to be imposed at outline. There's, well, again, members, for clarification, there are no conditions on the there are no conditions.
I'm sorry, you aren't allowed at this stage to speak. You will have a representative that can offer it. I'm sorry, you can't speak at this time.
Okay, so can I go back in time? Why wasn't it addressed then? We've talked previously, your colleagues have talked that you have to look at the application on its merit at the time, just like these one in Moston Lane that we were talking about. Why wasn't it done at the time?
Didn't know the code.
As an officer who wasn't involved in that decision, I'm unable to give you that indication. I wasn't at the planning committee, so I wasn't aware of the discussions that actually took place at that time. What I have to do is deal with the application that's in front of me. And legally, we are limited in the issues that can be taken into consideration of that. So whether, you know, whatever happened previously is not relevant to this decision. This application cannot be decided on the basis of a mix of properties or a desired mix of properties on the site, because that is a matter that has to be dealt with at outline stage.
So can you agree that this doesn't have any relevance to the actual needs of the housing in that area?
Yeah, okay. Yes, I'll come in on this point. I think what we have to recognise is that a housing market is very fluid, and what people want and demand from houses can change over time, and it's not as simple as to say if there is a need for single or couple, sorry, 1 or 2 bed households, that by providing larger homes, that need is not going to be indirectly met. I mean, the reality is, if you're talking about, say, a couple, they may be planning a family in the near future. They want to invest in a property that's a bit larger than what they need right now, so their household can grow. If you're providing 4 or 3 or 5 bedroom homes, someone who's currently squeezed into a smaller house in the area can upsize, free up their house, therefore for a single person or a couple. So it's not as straightforward as to simply say, because there is a need, every new development has to meet that specific need. Ultimately, with the outline application, or the hybrid application that was originally in, you know, the priority at that point in time, because of the lack of housing supply in the borough, was more housing, full stop. And that's what this application was providing. And as Graham's outlined now, ultimately it's not about the mix of sizes of dwellings that we're considering here today, it's about the reserved matters that Graham has set out.
Councillor Lancaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on from house types to house styles, I just wondered, it says here that there's no established vernacular, and whilst I'd accept that in the immediate vicinity of the area there are sort of more modern looks, I think it would be fair to say that the established vernacular in the areas of kind of a traditional Saddleworth village feel. I was just wondering what the planning officer's comments would be on that, really, on that point.
There is a mix of housing in the area, and yes, there are more traditional properties close by, but there are also modern style houses in the vicinity, in fairly close proximity to the site as well. There is a mix. There is no identifiable style that you might get. You might get a village somewhere where every property is in stone, for instance. That becomes the defined. It has a certain scale, certain height of buildings. Fenestration might be of a certain type. There is no distinct style of housing in the area. There is a mix of styles. There's a mix of styles. They're modern styles on this site, but there is a mix of properties. So again, if we were to again, consider it unacceptable, we'd have to be able to justify that, and given what's in the area, you know, well, the officer's view obviously is clear that there is no justification for doing that.
Councillor Woodbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that I've lived in Springhead, so I can speak from experience on this one. The issue is, if we build all these in brick, and I know some of them are going to have stone elements, it's not a case of there's no identifiable style in the area. There is, but the problem is, over the last 30, 40 years, the council's approved all bits and pieces, random applications, nothing looks alike. Well, they should have been saying this 40 years ago. This should be built in a natural and historically sympathetic way, which they haven't done. So I think it's not a case of, oh, we'll just play to the lowest common denominator, just build what you want, however ugly. We should be saying, no, it has to be built in a traditional style, which it isn't. And I wonder if we could ask them to be built in natural stone as opposed to brick. Is that possible?
I would imagine the answer is no at this stage. Councillor Dickman. Sorry, Mr. Dickman, do you want
Yeah, I mean, again, if you look in the general area, there's a mix. There's no, it isn't defined simply. It's not like one of the small Saddleworth villages that might be defined by stone properties. It isn't. There is a vast mix of different types in the area. And regardless, again, what's gone before, there are, you know, I'm just looking at Alderwood Fold, for instance. These are properties nearby, just off Knowles Lane. These are modern, you know, they've got stone coins in them. That's about as close as it gets, but they're of a modern style. They're not, you know, right on the edge of the area. There's a wide mix. To impose a stone onto this development, one would raise, and again, it's interesting because we're talking about, you know, housing for people. One of the things about you build them in stone, and I assume whether you're talking about the kind of artificial stone they're using here or natural stone, certainly it's natural stone, there's a cost implication. And there's a cost implication for people to be able to buy those properties. At the end of the day, this has to be, let's be clear, it has to be a commercial development, it has to work for people in that area. But in pure design terms, given the wider character of the area, there is no justification for saying these properties should all, or even the majority of them, should be built with stone facing.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify a point. When Mr. Dickman says it's not a small Saddleworth village, Springhead's one of Saddleworth's most historic villages, so I'd dispute that point. And there are parts of Springhead that are the earliest parts of Saddleworth, so that's not correct. And I think it's a shame that the councils are once again working to the lowest common denominator, build ugly buildings, and that's it. That's fine. These are going to be there for a long time, and it's a shame that we can't demand the best standards, but there you go.
Yes, Mr. Richards.
I suppose I just want to throw out there that I think some of the terminology is somewhat unfair. We're not talking about ugly buildings. I would disagree. I think, you know, various different house types and various people have different desires for what they want in a house, what they want a house to look like. You know, and we do hold developments to standards of design. So it's not a case of it being ugly. It may not be all of a historic character in the way that you're talking about or what have you, but not every development can be that way or should be that way.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Mann.
Could I ask that we go back to the rights of way slide, please, so we can see the existing rights of way and the proposed? What I understand is the existing rights of way, well, I know that the existing rights of way are all across fields and green spaces. So what part of the new proposed rights of way are going to be across roads, pathways? And has the rights of way officer objected to this and put any measures in place to change this?
Well, on the second part first, again, following on from this application or even the previous approval, some of the footpaths across the site will need to be diverted. So there will need to be a footpath diversion order put forward for those, separate to the planning process. In terms of this particular application, no, the rights of way officer hasn't raised any concerns about it, and in fact has been involved in some of the discussions about the style of path that goes through and the suitability of the style of path. As I say, going back right to the original last reserved matters application, this particular one would have come down the estate road. As you can see, it runs from the existing point at that end to the existing point at that end. It runs in a segregated route through the site. So it stays, obviously it's not going straight across a field, but it's completely segregated from roadways.
It won't be paved as such, it'll be a grassed path.
It'll have a kind of stone surface, a hard, it's not a loose stone, stone surface on it, So at the moment, obviously you're on a field footpath, so obviously we've had heavy rainfall, unless you've got good boots, that's not usable. This should be usable at other times of the year. The second footpath, I'm trying to remember which way it was, I think it's probably the other way, is it? That's the second one. So at the moment, again, you might just be able to see a dotted line that comes down. So this again is a field footpath that enters at the north, cuts down, and then cuts through the old farmyard at the bottom of the site. So it will again run in a segregated route through the site. At the moment, so that's the diversion of that. You would then have this short section, which is about, 50 metres, running across. You'd then continue back down again in a segregated route. But what the applicant has also added, so that's in addition to that, is it does this, in reality people will probably just walk down there. This is a cul-de-sac serving a small number of properties, and then again runs in a segregated route through to Knowles Lane. So ultimately, you've got, apart from either walking along this small stretch of roadway or walking down this cul-de-sac, you're on a segregated route for both footpaths through the site.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no further questions, if we could go on to the speakers.
Sorry, yeah,
Sorry.
one more. I hate to bring it up, but the mine shaft. Basically, how much is the developer actually going to be allowed to build before this issue is resolved, please?
Sorry, I got a bit distracted. Sorry, what was the question?
How much will the developer actually be allowed to proceed into build before the mine shaft issue will have to be resolved?
They could, as I say, as a separate element of this, they have to apply for discharge of conditions. When you apply for discharge of conditions, you can either come in for the whole development, you can come in for partial parts of the site. So, other than the area, if we go, Martin. So, as you can see, within the zone of influence, you've got these properties and then some gardens. Everything else on the site, so there's 234 houses. You've got 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, possibly these as well. So you've got about a dozen properties that are affected by it. That issue doesn't have to be resolved for everything else on the site. So that condition which covers the coal mining, that could be discharged for everything else. And if, for instance, they couldn't get a permit off the Coal Authority for the methodology, which the Coal Authority have now said, we think it's possible to do, but obviously they've got to see the full details of that, the rest of the development could be erected on site, assuming all other conditions have been discharged at that point.
Sorry, what phase is that then?
Those are in phase 1. But phase 1 is all, obviously, all this area as well.
So in effect, it could
Or is it phased?
significantly affect phase one, the first phase?
No, because again, if we go back to that layout, as you can see, so if you start construction here, you start building all these houses, that area is off at a cul-de-sac in the corner of the site. So there is no reason why all these, and then everything that extends beyond that can't be constructed. It's not, for instance, as if these are right at the entrance to the site and you have to resolve a problem at the access. You could, in theory, build the whole of the rest of that development, apart from that small area, because that is the only area affected by the, and it has to be said, it's a supposed mine shaft, because that is yet to be formally confirmed.
Can I just query as well the 50 metres? I thought it was a wider radius than that.
Well, this has been set by the Coal Authority, so this is the zone of influence that they have identified. These are the plans which the Coal Authority has commented on, and in their response where they say that a methodology in the zone of influence can be achieved. If they meant that there was anything beyond, then clearly they've not drawn any attention to it. So we can only assume that that is the area in which they have concerns.
Right. If there's no further questions, could I ask, Jane Barker to address the meeting? You've been before, you know the process.
Thank you, Chair. There are many reasons why this application should be refused, whilst the proposal is improved to meet what the area needs and match the promises that were made, including the housing type and mix, delivery of local play spaces for children of all ages, and the enhancement of existing footpaths. There is also the issue of safety. The decision notice for the outline application issued in December 2019 states any form of development over or within the influencing distance of a mine entry raises significant safety and engineering risks and exposes all parties to potential financial liabilities and should be avoided wherever possible. Yet this layout still includes properties within the zone of influence of a mine shaft. In the previous reserved matters application, there was some doubt over whether the Coal Authority had been consulted. Mr Dickman, you stated that you had consulted on the application, yet in the correspondence of the 23rd of June last year, the Coal Authority are adamant that they had not been. They raised concerns of the proposed layout, which includes built development within the zone of influence, and the scale of development provided scope to revise the layout to avoid this area of potential instability. That is a material planning consideration. So why didn't you mention this at the last application? And why did Mr Richards instruct the Planning Committee to disregard the same concerns raised by myself as the Speaker and the Ward Councillor when these concerns were perfectly valid? Last December, the Coal Authority raised a strong objection to this reserved matters application and were not happy that the previous application was approved against their advice. And they only withdrew their objection on the 19th of January when proposals to locate and treat the mine shaft were received, which would at least improve the current situation, but reiterated that building within the zone of influence should be avoided wherever possible. The decision to approve the last application leaves the Council exposed to a potentially huge financial risk. 17 properties are affected, and if there is a collapse, the financial liabilities could amount to millions of pounds. Was that something else Mr Richards and Mr Dickman forgot to mention last time? The only committee members who have ever voted for this development are Labour councillors who do not live in the area and don't value our green space. I remind those councillors that it's down to you to ask questions and ensure that developments are safe and that the council and council taxpayers aren't financially compromised. Have you considered that if any of the houses in the area of instability do collapse, people may get injured or die?
30 seconds.
Have you considered the potential of any corporate manslaughter charges that might occur in that situation against council officers and councillors if procedures aren't correctly followed? Our community has no confidence in the planning department, in particular Mr Dickman and Mr Richards, or in the Labour councillors who blindly nodded this through without question time after time. We will never forgive you. We have no confidence in the developer to deliver what they originally promised, and it's not too late to refuse this application and insist properties within the zone of influence are removed from the plan. We should ask for and expect better for all our communities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions on that? No? Okay. What amazes me is that, you know, coal mining in Oldham is very significant, and this isn't a unique experience for the planning committee to deal with. And many applications have similar conditions to this application in regard to coal mining. So I think that has to be borne in mind as well. Anybody got any questions? Okay then. If I then could ask, sorry, is it Thomas Rolfe to speak on behalf of the applicant?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. My name is Thomas Rolfe and I'm the Planning and Land Manager from Russell Homes. We strongly support your officer's recommendation to approve the reserve matters for 234 family homes alongside associated works. As noted by your officers, the proposals before you focus on the residential development of the hybrid planning permission and follow a previous reserve matters approval in July of last year. This application sees permission for an alternative NDSS compliant house type range. The proposals still deliver a range of new family housing including 2, 3, 4 and 5 bedroom homes in a traditional style suited to the character of the area. The house types are supported by officers because they are of a size of suitable for all family needs and aspirations are adaptable to the modern way of working from home. All homes on the development will deliver upon the necessary energy reduction targets and will be able to accommodate upcoming building regulation changes and will also include electric charging points and infrastructure. The proposals before you also bring forward the delivery of on-site affordable housing, with 42 of the affordable homes being delivered in the first 100 homes of the development. Therefore, through these proposals, more affordable homes will be delivered in the early stages of the development to help meet the Council's rising affordable housing needs. As previously approved reserve matters, all technical matters have been agreed with the Council and statutory consultees. The Coal Authority, since previous permission was granted in July 2022, have since confirmed the foundation solutions proposed are an acceptable solution for any property built in the zone of influence. The public rights-of-way have been diverted along the routes previously requested by the Council and are completely consistent with previously approved plans. The reserve matters proposals before you are consistent with all previous details approved in July of 2022 and will still deliver the key benefits of the wider scheme, including 53 affordable homes, delivery of larger family housing, energy-efficient homes meeting current energy reduction targets and building regulations, releasing land to assist St Agnes School in meeting their aspirations, the creation of 6.388 hectares of public open space and a local equipped area of play, a landscape-led development with 859 new trees and additional 2,773 metres of hedgerow. Therefore, we politely request that this reserve matters are approved in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woodbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you can probably tell, I've got a significant attention to detail. Two questions. One, how many two-bedroom houses will there be? And the second question is it possible to build the houses out of stone rather than brick?
I can answer those quite simply. There are 13 two-bedroom properties on the development, and there's a mixture of brick and stone across the development.
Councillor Marlin.
He beat me to it.
Councillor Lancaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I ask what the response is to the concerns raised around financial liability and safety of the prospective residents in that zone of influence?
Yeah, I mean, as stated, the Coal Authority have removed any objections to the application. They have since agreed that the methodology for foundation solutions, which would be imposed in that influence, if necessary, is adequate and appropriate. We have, as Mr. Dickman also pointed out, this is a historic note on a record of a mine shaft. Investigations have been ongoing, and the mine shaft, we don't even know if it's there. We don't know that it's there, and we're doing the investigation, and it could be concluded that it is not there, and that zone of influence could be removed by the Coal Authority. So those are the measures that are going through at the minute. Also, any occupier of that, when we build the properties, we'd have to get a coal authority permit. So the coal authority have to be satisfied that the buildings have been built in accordance with what they need it to be before any occupier of that building.
Councillor Gloucester.
Do I take it then the coal authority become liable if they give the wrong advice?
As far as I understand it, there's a coal authority permit that has to be granted for the houses when they are built. We have to get a permit from them before any property can be occupied. So I think they take on the liability if at that stage. As far as I don't know the two details, but that's what I understand it.
Is there any further questions at all? All right, thank you. Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the good people of Groton, Springhead and Lees. From the outside, I can imagine that there's a sense of deja vu whenever a Knowles Lane application comes up. You all know why it's important in my ward, but let me tell you why it's important in your ward. The development was sold to the Planning Committee. There was a quid pro quo, all above board. The loss of Opal land, green space, was justified and outweighed because of all the benefits the development would deliver. Given what will be lost, we should be demanding the very best. I'm here to tell you today that those benefits have either been quietly removed or diluted to the point where they're no longer relevant. If a developer can do that in my ward up in Saddleworth, it's a precedent that's set for doing it in Clint's ward in Royton, in Jenny's ward in Alexandra, in Angela's ward in St James, Peter's in Waterhead, Hazel's in Shaw, Aftab's in St Mary's, Feeder in Werneth, Sajid and Umar in Medlock Vale, Mohammed in Chadderton, and Luke, Max and Alicia in Saddleworth. There's a lip service paid to the conditions and promises. Our planning department should be demanding more. I'm not here saying the development can be stopped. I'm here saying that we should be asking for the best for our communities, and we should be asking for what was promised. I understand that planning law either says you can approve or reject, you can't defer. So I'm asking that you reject with a verbal guidance that it should be resubmitted once improvements that respond to criticisms over the shortcomings are addressed. I'm asking that for my ward, and I'm also asking that you show some teeth and backbone to potential future developers that might be eyeing spots in your ward. Specifically, the benefits given when planning was originally passed included that this was a big development, the first of its kind for over 10 years, and as such, it was a chance to respond to the area's housing need and mix, which is the complete opposite of what's being built. The need reported to councillors at the 2019 committee was greatest from single people and couples, so a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom properties. We're getting 3, 4 and 5 beds. Although you wouldn't know that because there has been no inclusion of how this apparent need for 3, 4 and 5 bed homes has been arrived at. This is important, it's not a technical point. And I think it's been mentioned that that actually wasn't, there's been some debate about whether the point was part of reserved matters. So I've got the committee report from 2019 and section 5.9 says the proposed development will provide up to 265 new dwellings. The mix of the size, type and tenure of new dwellings will be determined during a later reserved matters application. That's today. We can determine that now. And what's on offer is 3, 4 and 5 bed homes. It was sold to meet local housing need, which is 1 and 2 bed properties. That isn't included. That's wrong. One of the other promises was about delivery of spaces for local children of all ages. And what we're actually getting is 1 playground for infants for kids, infants to age 12. Well, childhood doesn't age at age 12. What about sort of 13 to 18-year-olds? It promised to maintain habitats and incorporate wildlife corridors. Instead, what we've got is the destruction of ancient woodland. It promised enhancements of existing footpaths and future management of those footpaths. Instead, what we've got is the valley being split in two with the introduction of 96 steps up and down over the new road, which discriminates against all but the most able-bodied. I mean, that's really important. We live in an industrial landscape that goes back hundreds of years. We know how long buildings last. And what we're doing here is we're splitting the valley in two and putting steps in that discriminates against anyone with a pushchair, kids' bikes, you know, even people in wheelchairs or mobility problems. It's just wrong. What was also promised was that these, some of these new and amended footpaths are also being diverted down pavements next to roads, which were specifically objected to by the Ramblers. The public were promised a consultation on a design code. Instead, other than public responses to planning submissions, there has been no consultation. There's not even compliance with Oldham's own design code. For example, the street scene, the view from the front of these properties, according to Oldham's adopted design code, is not meant to have lots of driveways to the front, and which incorporates a lot of view of lots of cars, which is exactly what we've got with this development. The developer and our planning officers, in essence, got a blank canvas to work with. So why on earth are these promises being diluted? And for that matter, why on earth aren't the minimum space standards for rooms being enforced? This affects over 70 houses. We've got 17 houses being built over a mine shaft that the developer still can't locate. A coal authority which adds the caveat to its grudging approval that it would have preferred no development in the zone of influence, and that all parties, including the council, will be liable for loss due to any death or injury over this shaft, and a direction that none of these 17 properties in the future can extend. As Saddleworth Parish Council point out, there is also no mention of electric vehicle charging points, despite Mr Rolfe's promise. Finally, the suburban drainage system proposed doesn't match the actual capacity anticipated, leading to an increased flood risk, not just to those homes but existing homes nearby. This drainage scheme doesn't appear to protect existing watercourses from a water quality perspective either. There doesn't appear to be any porous paving, and there are no interceptors. So looking at the outfall at the end of Road 12, for example, there is nothing to treat runoff from the road going straight into the watercourse. I'm speaking on behalf of the people in my own ward, but also people across the borough. And I want you to listen that this is a precedent for all our wards, that Oldham will accept lower standards. Don't we deserve better from our planning department and developers? Don't our communities deserve better when developers go to work in our neighbourhoods? And don't we all deserve developments that fulfil the promises made at planning stage? Change is possible. Deferment is sadly not an option, but rejection with that in mind is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions? No? Just make a comment. I'm quite happy with the 400 new houses in Waterhead Ward. You know, I think they're quite good, but never mind. I'm sorry, I'm just saying that I'm quite happy with the developments in my ward, which is almost 400 houses. It's just that Councillor Kenyon challenged us whether we're actually looking at them. Is there anybody else got any comments at all? Councillor Pithy?
Can I just ask the officers a question? What Councillor Kenyon said about the mine shaft. So the coal authority would be happy not to build on this area at all. Is this true? This I don't know.
Absolutely true.
Right.
Yes, of course it is.
Right.
From the coal authority's point of view, mining legacy has potential implications for safety. Of course it does. But in this instance, the developer has been given the opportunity to demonstrate that they can create a development which is safe, and the methodology is safe for that. So yes.
What put safe foundations in place? Right.
Yes.
But there's still a potential for the houses to collapse into a mine shaft, though. Is that basically?
Well, I'm not certain that the coal authority would say that they think the methodology is safe if they had any inclination to think that it wouldn't be unsafe. The two things are not the same thing, of course.
Right.
So you're right, the Coal Authority quite rightly would say that. United Utilities will say to you, we don't want you to put your drainage into our system, but if a developer can demonstrate that the system can cope with that, they have to allow it. It's the same thing. So yeah, strictly taken out of context, that is...
Like say, for example, an area that's prone to flooding, they'll say they'll come in and put specific drainage systems in place so they can build on that. Is that similar kind of thing you mean? Yeah, yeah.
Councillor Woodbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's clear that there is still issues surrounding the mine shaft, and I don't think this council should be approving something that is a known risk. And obviously the council's very concerned about big costs such as £900, and I think we should take into account the potential liability and the confusion with the Coal Authority, and I'd move refusal. Thank you.
Is that seconded?
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go forward, could I ask Mr. Evans to make a comment?
Well, at this stage, Chair, I think you need to find out what the reasons suggested for refusal are.
Yeah.
For all the reasons stated in discussions this evening.
What are those? No, they have to be planning reasons. We have to have defined planning reasons for...
Mr. Chairman, I think the primary concern is around the the safety of the prospective residents in the zone affected around the potential mine shaft and the potential financial implications liability.
Right.
I'm very sorry that you didn't listen to Councillor Kenyon and Ms Barker's contributions, because they were all relevant planning reasons.
I certainly did, but I think that, you obviously don't bear in mind that this, well, I'm sure you must bear in mind that this application has various approvals around the development. And we're discussing today the house types mainly and the landscaping around it. So obviously to refuse this application based on what's before us has to have content in the refusal that are planning issues. Sorry, Councillor Gloucester.
Can I just ask then, so at what point does what the Coal Authority say become applicable? Because we were told earlier we could have said at the outline stage that we needed 2-bed properties in that area, but obviously I didn't know that, and I don't really think any other member of the committee would have known that. So you're saying now it doesn't really matter what the Coal Authority is saying because that's not part of the consideration tonight. So at what point...
I don't think anybody's saying that. I think I'll bring Mr. Richards in. Nobody's ever said that, because basically ever since this application was approved, I think in 2019, there's always been a condition around the issue of coal workings. So I'll ask Mr. Richards to explain that.
So just to reiterate, ultimately, that at this point in time, in terms of the reserved matters application before you tonight, the Coal Authority have said they have no objection to it, because, having gone through a process with ourselves and with the applicant, they believe that there is a methodology that can be put in place that will allow housing to be built within the zone of influence safely. However, that's not the end of it. That covers off, in terms of the decision tonight, that there is no outstanding objection from the Coal Authority to this application. What we also have is a discharge of condition application already to be considered as we move forward in relation to the original hybrid application that would require to be discharged by us as a local planning authority. And we would only do that if at that point the Coal Authority reaffirms, having looked at in more detail following the investigations that the applicant will be doing, that they alluded to, mentioned earlier, and in terms of the more work being done on that methodology for constructing the houses safely in this area, if there is even a mine shaft after those surveys have been completed. So that condition would not be discharged unless the coal authority say to us, it is acceptable to do so. We as a local planning authority would not do that. Then thirdly, the applicant also has to apply for permits directly to the coal authority, separate from the planning process, in order to construct and then occupy the dwellings in that situation. So all these things are in place to ensure that the public are safe, that the people who ultimately own and live in those houses are safe. And so the issue of liability and that kind of thing that has been raised, first of all, as the applicant said earlier, if the coal authority grants a permit and nothing can happen until they do, then our understanding is that as the coal authority then have granted that permit, they have said it's safe. It is not us saying it's safe at that point, it's the coal authority. So that I'm not aware of any risk to us financially as a council in that situation. I've certainly not come across that in terms of case law and other history of these situations. The bottom line is we live in an area where there is a coal mining history and we have to work with that. And the coal authority are there to advise us and help us to build responsibly and safely. And when I say us, I mean collectively as a society. And that's the processes we are going through.
I'm aware of that. You aren't supposed to pass any notes to members of the committee. Well, you should have done.
Chair, can I just ask?
So yes, that's fine, Councillor Glasgow.
So, let's just, I know it's completely hypothetical, but I think this is really important. So if the coal authority did decide that they couldn't build safely on that land, I'm assuming the developer would just be told, even though they've been granted permission for that zone of land at this moment in time, they would just be told you can't build on that anymore. And it would never happen if it was unsafe to do so. Is that correct?
They could not build and occupy the buildings without a coal authority permit.
Chair,
right. Where we're up to, Councillor is saying is it's been moved and seconded with the reason regarding the coal mine issue, I think, as the reason for refusal. So it's been moved and seconded refusal. So
if you're actually moving to the vote now, just
no, I'm not moving to the vote. I'm just explaining where we're up to with the councillor is saying. So you welcome to your comments, councillor.
I was just going to ask a simple question. How many properties will be affected, out of the 234 properties, will be affected by this mine shaft? 17. The whole of them, part of them, or?
I think 16, I think. 16, I think. 17.
Graham's just counting them.
So we've got 8 directly, and this is some more with gardens, but not obviously buildings in those areas. Of 234, yes.
Yeah, well, okay then. Mr. Evans wanted to make some comments before we go any further.
Yes, Chair, just to remind members that if you are minded to refuse the planning application this evening, you have to do so for valid planning reasons, which in the event of an appeal you'll be required to substantiate, otherwise it will be deemed to be unreasonable behaviour by the planning authority, and as I mentioned before, there's a potential of costs being awarded against the council. I would just make a comment about the the issue about the coal authority. My understanding of it would be that if we are relying on the coal authority as the appropriate body to deal with determine these matters, any liability would rest on them because they're the body, and if we are just acting on their recommendations, we should not be liable. But obviously every case depends on its facts, but the general principle would be we would be entitled to rely on the coal authority's advice, because they're the body that's responsible for dealing with these matters, and we take account of their advice.
Thank you. Councillor Gloucester.
Yeah, it's just really bothering me, this, because we're relying on somebody that can't even tell us if there is something there or how big it is at this moment in time. And it just seems ridiculous. I get what you're saying about a permit and all the rest of it, but if they can't even say at this stage, bearing in mind it must be at least 3 years ago that this originally went through for outline planning, and at this stage they still don't know if there's a mine there, it just really concerns me.
Councillor Martin.
What if the mine shaft isn't there, and what if it's nearer to the houses that are proposed? When will this investigation be concluded, please?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, that's more to the developers.
That might have been a question when we was you had the opportunity to the developer. So. Sorry. Go on if you wish.
I can come back on the chair if this clarifies the position. We have done the investigation and we've come to the conclusion that we don't think the shaft is there. A report has been filed to the Coal Authority expressing that position, that we're going through that process with them. We don't think the shaft is there. As been said, you know, there are solutions to this, foundation solutions to this shaft, if it is to be there, which are appropriate methods to do, you know, construction, which is, as been noted, is a historic legacy of Oldham. Back homes are built on mine shafts all over the country in the UK with these necessary solutions. Coal Authority permits that grant the occupation of those properties thereafter. Well, we've done the investigations today and we don't think it's there, so we submitted that evidence to the Coal Authority for them to case. But regardless of that, there is a solution to be the foundation solution appropriate for this site.
Swango, you've investigated it today, but it's the Coal Authority's responsibility. And how does that work?
No, we've done the investigations to identify whether this coal shaft is or not there. We have done the investigations and we feel that there is no mine shaft there. And we have submitted that evidence to the Coal Authority, which is a process that's ongoing, and they are now reviewing that. And if they conclude that that is the case, then the zone of influence could be removed in its entirety. Regardless of that, there is a technical solution, foundation solution in place, which the Coal Authority have commented on and says an acceptable solution moving forward. And there is no objection to this application from the Coal Authority.
Right. Councillor Lancaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to return to the theme of house types as well. I'm not proposing to add this to the proposal for refusal, but I just think it's worth noting that the sort of shifting goalposts in terms of housing type from the time of when there's the outline permission approved to these reserve matters, I think it's one of the reasons why public trust in the planning system can erode and why it can be low, because I think people do feel that sometimes there are matters which are thought to have been consistent on, which later appear to have been changed. So I do have appreciation as well to the points made by councillors Marland and Kenyon and the resident objector as well around the house types, because it does seem to me that there's been a change of thinking on this which might not be reasonable.
I think at some stages as well that the house types have to change because of new building regulations, and I think this is one of the cases. That's my understanding, Mr. Dickman, is it? That some of the house types have to change because of new building regulations.
Again, that's probably one that should be directed to the applicant, but my understanding is yes, that's part of the reason why they've decided to change those house types.
Anyway, there we go. It's been moved and seconded refusal, and you've heard the officer's advice. All those in favour of refusal, please show.
2, 3, 4, Chairman.
4. Those against refusal, please show.
9, Chairman.
So, is there, I don't think there's any abstentions, is there? No. So, the application's been refused. Councillor Woodbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please can I move that we defer the application then subject to the clarity on from the Coal Authority and those discussions that we've had about that.
Sorry?
Do you want me to take that?
Yes.
Okay, so we've set out tonight that there is no objection from the Coal Authority, and so for this application, that is what we need for us to take it forward on that issue. If there was still an outstanding objection, you may have a valid point to ask for deferral. I think what we also need to refer back to, of course, is that this site already has a reserve matters permission, and the developer, if they wish to, could implement that tomorrow, and that's the fallback if in a position in that sense. What we have instead is an improved scheme before us that addresses some of the concerns raised previously, and I think there is no basis to defer the application tonight. There's no missing information, so to speak.
Councillor Woodbine.
Just for I know the head of planning wasn't in post at the last application time, but the report from the Times says that building on or near the mine shaft entry should be avoided where possible, and the Coal Authority advised the council of that, and we're obviously just contradicting ourselves now 3 years later. So it's a shame, really, Mr. Chairman.
Right. You moved it be deferred for what? The view of the Coal Authority that's already said they have no objection.
I think we should seek clarity because there's so much confusion over this situation. Well, that might suit your narrative, but there obviously is confusion over it, and it's not right that we just rush these applications through without going through the due processes.
Well, we've been through a lot of processes with this, and the Coal Authority quite clearly have said that they have no objection to this particular application. All right then, I'll get the correct terminology. I'll get the correct I'm sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Barker.
Let's get exactly what they say.
None of us are in the realms of understanding where the Coal Authority actually are. As the process works through, with members who've obviously been on committee a few times, we've had discussions previously about consultation responses and requests that we put those on the website. And one of the reasons why we determined not to put them on the website is precisely because quite often it's a moving element to it. So quite often, it might be my colleague Wendy here on the highway side, a scheme might come in, Wendy might have some queries about it and say, well, I don't think those roadways are wide enough or those footpaths are appropriate. We don't then determine the application at that point and go, we'll refuse it because it doesn't meet. We then look to see whether there is a solution to that. So as originally submitted, the Coal Authority did not have enough information for them to be able
I'm sorry,
to say
they
objected to the application.
I'm sorry.
We've seen, and I think Ms Barker has circulated to all the members, the 3 copies of the Coal Authority's responses on this application. And if you look through those chronologically, you will see how this has developed. And over time, more information has been given to the Coal Authority, which has meant they have moved from an initial point of saying we wouldn't support this to a point where they say we are happy with this. You've all had access to those 3 documents, so you can read that for yourself. The reality is that if committee was to refuse an application on the basis that there is a coal mine in danger, and as my colleagues have said, you go to appeal, the inspectorate will say, well, where's your evidence? What does the specialist organisation that deals with coal mining, the Coal Authority, say? Well, here's their response. They say it can be achieved. So they are not recommending refusal of the application. And therefore, there's no more to be dealt with. And we move on to the fact that regardless of the outcome of tonight, As you know, on the outline approval, there's a condition that relates to ground conditions that we include in there. Are the ground conditions that relates to the coal authority acceptable? So that will need to be discharged. If the coal authority, when they've seen the developers, you know, surveys and so forth, and say, oh, well, you know, we now think it's not safe, they will advise us accordingly. If the coal authority say to us, we think that's unsafe, we're not going to discharge that condition, and the coal authority is clearly not going to issue a permit. So going on to the issue that was mentioned before, they can't build these houses. It's like anything, you know, you need building regulations approval as well. Having planning permission doesn't allow you to build a house if you haven't got the building regs through. It's the same principle that comes through. On this particular scheme, that they've demonstrated that there is a solution to that property.
I'm sorry, you know, this is about the 4th or 5th time you've interrupted when you know you aren't supposed to interrupt.
Through you, Chair, what the proceedings of that meeting are a matter of public record. They are available on the internet. They're available for anybody to see what the discussion was.
Anyway,
so you'll be able to people will be able to draw their own conclusions.
Anyway, Mr. Dickman, it's been moved that we defer this. Is that seconded?
Why not, Mr. Chairman? I'll second that.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. And the reason I assume of what you said is for further information on the coal authority's views. Right. Those in favour of deferral, please show. So that's 4. Those against deferral, please show. Thank you. So that's 9. So that's 9-4. Could I move approval of this application? Is that seconded? I'm sorry, is that seconded? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, please can I move an amendment that we remove the 17 houses that are situated on the mine shaft from the application?
I'm sorry, you can't move amendments on a developer's application.
Please speak through the chairman.
I'm sorry, you can't. As I understand it, I'll ask Mr. Richards, but you have to make a decision on what's before you, and that's my clear understanding. This is a developer's application, but I'll ask Mr. Richards to clarify that.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's correct. So it's been moved and seconded approval. Those in favour of approval, please show. 9. Those against? 4. So it's been approved by 9 votes to 4. Thank you very much indeed. If we go to the next item on the agenda, which is the bridge over the Medlock Valley. Could make a song out of that. Who's presenting? It's Mr. Dickman again, is it?
Thank you, Chair. As the members can see, obviously this is a proposal for a new bridge across the Medlock Valley, the Park Bridge area of the site. I'll run through the presentation and show you the details of this. Ultimately, as you see in the report, this is all part of the B network, proposed improvements to the cycling and walking network across the borough. And at the moment, there is an element there as it crosses the valley where the cycle route in particular has to take a inconvenient diversion through the site. So this is just showing, obviously it's still difficult to work through at the moment. This is to show you the application site. This is the area of the bridge on either side of the bridge, and then these footpaths that cut through on either side. Once we get to this point, we're actually in Tameside, and Tameside Council are dealing with the identical application for their part of this, which is due to go before their panel next week. So we're slightly ahead of them, but we try to coordinate those two decisions as well as we can. So this is the area. So it's close to Park Bridge Heritage Centre. The area now is quite wooded, so there's a valley as the river cuts through, so it's quite steep-sided on both parts of this. to the north, you go heading towards where Northern Routes is, which you remember from recent. Just give you an indication of what it used to look like, and obviously, as you can see, there's significant changes from the industrial heritage. But I'm showing this primarily because this area, where the old viaduct used to be, is where the new bridge is going to go. So effectively, it's reinstating a feature that was there previously. And what that's showing you is obviously the land levels there, and how that drops into the valley itself. And that's the feature that we're trying to improve. I've got a couple of show you footpaths and cycles at the moment. So these orange dots are the cycle network. So you'll see at the northern end, at the Oldham end, it comes down into the site. At the Tameside side, it comes to here. At the moment, you have to divert off for a fairly convoluted route through the site, and it heads up here, through Dingle Terrace, and then back through the site. Just give it in a wider context, so where you come there, and then obviously at that northern end, it then links through to the footpath cycle links that go through Northern Routes. This at the moment, as you come from the Oldham side, is where you get to. And at this point, the valley side drops away completely. So obviously cycles in particular, you can get down there on foot. Cycles in particular can't go any further at that point. There are crossings at the lower level through the site. These are giving you some views, so this is just looking to it. And you can see the established greenery now and how that's changed, obviously, since the industrial buildings were removed. And this is the bridge and the visualisation of the bridge itself. So again, it's on a couple of piers. These are made to be fairly thin, fairly narrow. They're faced in brickwork, so obviously to give it an historic feel to them. There's a parapet either side, which obviously allows viewing through the site, but obviously is there for security and for other purposes. It's 5 metres across, so it's capable of accommodating cycles and walkers at the same time. These are just giving you, so that's just a plan view at the top that you can see there, so obviously that's the width of it as it cuts and how it joins in at either side of the valley. And this is probably more use, is the elevational treatment. So you can see the columns which hold it through the valley, and then the bridge again that then links through from either side. This is just a technical drawing, just actually showing the way the piers and the deck actually meet, and this is the deck. So these are the parapets around the side of it, and this is the 5 metre wide deck itself. These are taken from a drone, I understand. So this is the view that you would get if you're looking west when you're up on the bridge. And this is the view that you will get when you're looking in the opposite direction. There's been, as you can see, there's not many residential properties in the area. The nearest properties are Dean Terrace, which is actually in Tameside, and we have had one of the objections from one of those residents. But that's over 100 metres away too there, and as you can see, there's plenty of intermittent greenery as well. So in terms of possible loss of privacy, it's not considered that would be significant. When you get to the north of the bridge at the moment, it turns into this footpath, so there'll need to be improvements to this as well to facilitate cycles and pedestrians. And then at this point, you link back in to the cycle network, which then takes you, if you go that direction, in towards Northern Routes. So really, I think that's the finish of it, yeah. So this is just to give you, again, a couple more visuals, giving an indication of what that will look like. So as I say, the reasoning for this is to improve cycling, footpath networks across the borough itself. It's not necessarily intended that people come and visit the bridge itself from here. It's that they will use it and it will improve the facilities for people to get through across the site. As I say, obviously there's other issues in the report. Obviously we're getting late on now. I'm sure members won't want me to keep going on. If you've got any questions, obviously I'll be pleased to answer them.
We'll start that side. Get Councillor Hussain first.
Not that it matters, it's just because we've dealt with materials, actually the surface materials in the bridges, in the past. I'm just wondering what sort of material will be used here.
I can't answer that for you, but obviously in terms of the detail that will be provided, it will be, if you think of what the intention of this is to facilitate, quite a lot of usage for cycles, for pedestrians and so forth. So I can't answer the question, but you would take it as read that it will be appropriate for that facility. I mean, we do have a materials condition on there, so that the final detail will come to us in any case.
Will it be jointly maintained by Tameside and Oldham? After it's been built? Do you know this?
Possibly we could ask the applicant, who's, the speaker on behalf of the applicant. Councillor Merlin.
Yeah, just the point on here again about coal authority. Intrusive investigations should be undertaken. What will be the case with this one? And who would? That's the applicant. Yeah, and who would be responsible? Who's doing it?
Again, the same element applies, that the investigations will, they're conditional on the approval, so it has to be proven. I think what the applicant has said is that because of the nature of the proposal, and obviously there are funding issues, again, it's not within the realms of planning, there are funding issues to that until the principle has been established that a bridge would be acceptable across there, those investigations really can't take place. But again, there is nothing to say from the Coal Authority or from any other consultees, including Greater Manchester Ecology Unit, who've raised other issues on the site, that any concerns cannot be overcome. But we need to move forward to that. These are obviously standard issues. That's why planning allows conditions to be imposed, that it's not necessary for everything to be concluded at the point that you determine a planning application, but before implementation takes place, all these matters have to be satisfied.
Councillor Marlin.
So, sorry, what was the former? What used to be there? It used to be a mill.
It would have been a mill originally, yes, with a viaduct.
Used
so
to be a large ironworks. It used to be a large historic ironworks that used to manufacture steel, and also there used to be a viaduct that went across, as illustrated there. Yeah. Councillor Woodburn.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Hypothetically, what would happen if we approve this and Tameside refuse it at their planning committee?
Then it can't go ahead. Because exactly. Well, it could go ahead, but obviously there's no.
If there's no further questions, we do have a speaker on behalf of the applicant who possibly could just more or less answer the questions that have been raised.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been high-level discussions about the ongoing costs of the bridge in terms of the whole life costs. That's between Tameside and Oldham. No definitive decision has been made as yet. It is unlikely to be a shared responsibility. It becomes quite difficult for both councils. There are statutory obligations with bridges in terms of general inspections, principal inspections, ongoing maintenance, and I'm sure there are several bridges around Oldham where it crosses the border, whether that's a road bridge, a cycle bridge, and usually it's delegated to one authority or the other. It could still be shared, but in my experience it's unlikely. So the whole bridge would be maintained either by Tameside or Oldham, I suspect. No further comments.
Councillor Mann.
Thank you. I've got a concern about, I think a similar issue happened many years ago over the dual carriageway, and it had to be covered over to prevent any loss of life, I suppose you should call it. What's the situation with this in terms of how high the sides are going to be? Is it going to be, it's not going to be enclosed from what I can see?
It's 2.4 metres high, parapet.
2.4? Right, okay, apologies, I missed that. It doesn't look 2.4 in that picture, but I know it's only indicative. But okay, thank you.
Any further questions at all, comments? No? Okay, can I formally move approval for this?
Yeah, second.
Thank you. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. The next item is Chatterton Police Station, who've been naughty boys because it's a retrospective application. So I think it's just regarding the parking and access to the building.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a brief introduction for this one. So this is item number 9 relating to the police station on Broadgate in Chatterton. So this is a site, the triangular shaped site on the plan there. It's adjacent to the Rochdale Canal, Gateway Crescent and Broadgate in Chatterton. And it does comprise the current police station building with access from Gateway Crescent. As covered in the report, there is relevant planning history to this. Planning permission was granted in December 2017 for an extensive redevelopment of the site, and then that was followed by an application for what we call a non-material amendment for tweaks to that permission. And as the scheme has obviously developed, there's been a need for some changes which have been come to you now on a retrospective basis, but they are still relatively minor in the scheme of what's been previously approved, and they relate largely to the car parking layout and some minor alterations to the internal layout and the external elevations. We've had no objections to the application, and the scheme, assessed against all our relevant policies, does remain compliant, and the changes that have been made to the building and the site simply aim to improve the function of the building and its ultimately its occupation as a police station. So the recommendation, as you'll see in the report, is for approval. Thank you.
Any questions, anybody? No? Could I finally move approval?
Second.
All those in favour? It's unanimous. And the last item on the agenda is appeals update, which is there for noting. Anybody got any comments? Sorry.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. When I went to the appeal hearing for the Lidgate application, they said they would expect a response by February at the latest, and we're now midway through February. I was wondering if the planning department had any update on whether we're going to expect a decision soon.
No. Sorry, I didn't hear which one that related to.
The land off Stockport Road at Lidgate.
Okay. No, when we get the decisions through, any appeals that are lodged, they come through without much warning. So as soon as the decisions are released, we update the monthly report.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance, and I'll close the meeting.